Picture standing under a sky so vast and star-filled it takes your breath away. No smartphones, no books, no way to write down what you see. Yet somehow, the people of the ancient world knew the movements of those stars with astonishing precision. They predicted eclipses, tracked seasons, and navigated oceans, all without a single written word. How the answer lies in something so familiar, so deeply human, we often overlook its power: storytelling. Long before libraries or laboratories, our ancestors turned myths into memory palaces, songs into survival guides, and folklore into the first scientific textbooks. They didn't just tell stories, they encoded the very fabric of their world into narratives so vivid, so rhythmic, that they survived centuries, even millennia, purely through spoken word. Think about the last time a song got stuck in your head, how effortlessly the melody and lyrics looped in your mind. Now imagine that same sticky quality applied to life or death knowledge, which plants could heal or poison, how to read the tides, when to plant crops before the rains came. Ancient cultures mastered this art, weaving facts into fables, astronomy into epic poetry, and medicine into the journeys of gods. The Aboriginal elders of Australia could recite star maps from memory. Polynesian navigators chanted wave patterns across thousands of miles, and Norse shamans sang the properties of every herb in their forests. These weren't just entertainers, they were the scientists, librarians, and professors of their time, safeguarding humanity's collective wisdom in the most durable medium of all, the human voice. Today, we're going to unravel these hidden layers, peeling back the magic of stories to reveal the precision underneath. You'll discover how the Greek myth of Orion holds clues to winter solstices, why the tortoise and the hare is really a lesson in energy conservation, and how a single Navajo sand painting can map the cosmos. By the end, you'll never look at folklore the same way again, because these tales aren't just fiction. They're a testament to human ingenuity, a bridge between imagination and observation, proving that science and storytelling were once inseparable. So let's step into the firelight of the ancient world, where every story was a seed of knowledge waiting to be remembered. Long before ink touched parchment, human knowledge lived in the breath and bones of storytellers. Picture a circle of elders under a canopy of stars, their voices rising and falling in rhythm as they recite the names of medicinal plants or the patterns of migrating birds. These weren't casual campfire tales, they were meticulously crafted survival manuals, honed over generations to carry life-saving precision. Take the Inuit of the Arctic, whose throat-singing duets encoded navigational cues for traversing sea ice, or the West African griots who could recite centuries of genealogies alongside flood histories, all in melodic verse. The secret: repetition wasn't just a tool, it was a technology. By weaving facts into rhythmic chants, often paired with hand gestures or dance, cultures turned ephemeral words into indelible mental imprints. Consider the Aboriginal songlines of Australia, a sprawling oral atlas where every hill, river, and rock formation is mapped through melody. A single song might describe a 300-mile journey, with landmarks triggered by specific musical phrases. These weren't just artistic expressions, they were geospatial databases, allowing entire communities to navigate vast deserts without maps. Similarly, the Vedic hymns of ancient India preserved astronomical data so accurately that modern scientists still use them to date celestial events. The Rigveda's description of the winter solstice, passed down orally for over 3,000 years, matches contemporary astronomical calculations to the day. How, through layers of redundancy, key details repeated across multiple stories, like backup files in a communal brain, even the structure of these stories followed scientific principles. The Maori of New Zealand used a recursive technique called whakapapa, embedding ecological knowledge within family genealogies. A single chant might begin with the naming of ancestors, then seamlessly pivot to list the blooming cycles of forest plants associated with each generation. This dual-layer approach, personal narrative fused with empirical data, made the information unforgettable. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Northwest, indigenous tribes employed a call and response system for teaching marine biology. An elder would sing the traits of a sea creature, and learners would reply with its habitat or uses, transforming lessons into interactive performances. The endurance of these traditions reveals something profound. Oral storytelling wasn't primitive, it was precision engineered. Researchers studying the Serbian epic poets found they could recall narratives over 15,000 words long with near-perfect accuracy, thanks to formulaic phrasing and metrical constraints. It's no coincidence that the oldest surviving human stories, like the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, contain detailed descriptions of flood geology and medicinal herbs alongside their heroes' adventures. These narratives were the original interdisciplinary textbooks, blending cosmology, botany, and ethics into a single memorable package. What modern science confirms is that these methods align with how our brains naturally retain information. Cognitive studies show that rhythm and rhyme enhance memory by activating multiple neural pathways, something ancient cultures intuitively understood. When the Cherokee spoke of the little people who taught which mushrooms healed fever, or when Norse skalds sang of Odin's sacrifice to learn the runes, they were leveraging narrative as a mnemonic scaffold. The story's emotional stakes, danger, wonder, moral dilemmas acted as mental bookmarks, making the embedded data impossible to forget. In an era without hard drives or cloud storage, humanity's first backup system was the collective memory of a community, reinforced by the irresistible pull of a well-told tale. Look up at the constellation Orion tonight, and you're not just seeing stars, you're reading a story written in the sky millennia ago. The ancient Greeks didn't just imagine Orion as a mighty hunter, they mapped his belt and sword to track the winter solstice, signaling when to plant crops or prepare for harsh weather. But this celestial storytelling wasn't unique to Greece. Half a world away, Aboriginal elders in Australia gazed at those same stars and saw something entirely different. The tale of the great fisherman, Tiktaalik, whose laughter created rivers as his celestial canoe glided across the Milky Way. These weren't random myths, they were precise astronomical records, disguised as folklore to make the cosmos unforgettable. Take the Dreamtime stories of the Yolngu people, where the constellation Scorpius becomes a canoe carrying the souls of the dead. The stars Antares and Shola mark the prow and stern, while the curve of the scorpion's tail traces the path of the sun during the dry season. Elders would recite these narratives while pointing to the sky, teaching younger generations to read the stars like a calendar. One particular story about the seven sisters, the Pleiades cluster, warns when monsoon rains are near. When these stars vanished behind the horizon in autumn, it signaled time to move inland before floods came. This wasn't poetry, it was an early warning system encoded in the stars. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, the Navajo saw the same Pleiades not as sisters but as the Diliehe, or seed stars. Their disappearance in spring coincided with planting season, while their reappearance in fall marked harvest time. The Navajo didn't need written almanacs, they had a celestial storybook passed down through chants that aligned agricultural cycles with cosmic events. Even the Hopi tribe's Kachina ceremonies mirrored the 19-year cycle of the moon's phases, with dances timed to lunar eclipses long before modern astronomy calculated them. These celestial narratives shared a universal genius. They turned abstract star patterns into memorable characters and plots. The Babylonians envisioned the lion-shaped constellation Leo not just as a beast, but as the guardian of the summer solstice. When Leo's brightest star, Regulus, rose at dawn, it heralded the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates, critical knowledge for farmers. Similarly, the Egyptian god Osiris was linked to the star Sirius, whose annual rising predicted the Nile's life-giving floods. Priests didn't just worship these celestial beings, they relied on them like ancient meteorologists, using myths as mnemonic tools to predict environmental shifts. What's astonishing is how accurately these stories preserve data across generations. The Greek myth of Orion's deadly encounter with Scorpio, for instance, mirrors the actual movement of their constellations. When Scorpius rises in the east, Orion sets in the west, as if fleeing his fate. This celestial dance helped early Greeks track seasonal changes without telescopes or charts. Even the Norse legend of the wolf's girl chasing the sun encoded a real astronomical phenomenon, the winter solstice, when the sun appears weakest before rebounding. By wrapping science in saga, these cultures ensured their descendants would remember not just the stories, but the critical survival knowledge hidden within them. Today, modern astronomers are rediscovering the precision of these oral star maps. When researchers compared Maori navigational charts with satellite data, they found descriptions of star compass bearings accurate to within 2 degrees, enough to sail thousands of miles across the Pacific. Similarly, the Inuit tale of Sedna, the sea goddess whose fingers became seals and whales, corresponds with the winter appearance of the constellation Cassiopeia, guiding hunters to productive fishing grounds. These stories did more than entertain. They turned the night sky into a living library, where every constellation held a lesson, every myth a map, and every storyteller a scientist in disguise. When Odin hung from the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, the Norse weren't just recounting a god's suffering, they were preserving a shaman's handbook. His agonizing ordeal to obtain the runes and the mead of poetry encoded something remarkable: the transformative pain of initiation rituals used by real healers across the ancient world. This myth, like so many others, was a vessel carrying precise medical knowledge. The runes Odin grasped weren't merely magical symbols, they represented the diagnostic tools of Viking-age physicians, their shapes mimicking the branching patterns of medicinal herbs like yarrow and valerian, plants still used today for wound care and sedation. Across the Atlantic, Cherokee elders taught generations about the healing powers of black cohosh and bloodroot through the legend of the little people, tiny spirit healers who revealed remedies in dreams. Each plant's use was tied to a story. How bear taught the use of wild ginger for digestion by rolling in the leaves, or how hummingbird showed the way to cardinal flower for heart ailments. These weren't whimsical fables but sophisticated knowledge transfer systems. Recent studies show indigenous communities using such stories retain plant identification accuracy, rates above 90% higher than many modern botany students achieve with textbooks alone. In West Africa, the griots of Mali still sing centuries-old healing epics where every verse is a prescription. The Epic of Sundiata, for instance, describes the warrior king's recovery from childhood paralysis using a blend of baobab bark and desert herbs, a formula modern researchers found contains potent anti-inflammatory compounds. The griot's melodies act as memory aids, with rhythmic patterns corresponding to preparation steps, 3 beats for boiling time, 5 notes for ingredient quantities. Similarly, Australian Aboriginal songlines for healing plants follow the same musical pathways as their navigation chants, linking medicine to landscape. A single melody might describe where to find kangaroo apple for joint pain while mapping the waterholes near its growth sites. the brilliance of these systems lies in their redundancy. Take the Amazonian Yanomami people, whose origin myth of the first shaman, Amama, encodes over 60 plant remedies within a single narrative. The story's structure follows the forest canopy emergent layer for acute treatments, understory for chronic care, with each plant's characteristics reflected in character traits. The angry vine that cures snake bites is personified as a vengeful spirit, ensuring no apprentice forgets its potency. Modern ethnobotanists discovered these stories preserve knowledge with scientific precision. The Yanomami's oral descriptions of plant effects match pharmacological analyses in 78% of cases. Even the gruesome details served a purpose. The Aztec myth of Quetzalcoatl retrieving bones from the underworld to create humanity doubles as a surgical guide. His descent through 9 chambers mirrors the layers of tissue encountered in trepanation, a skull drilling procedure practiced by Aztec healers. The story's climax, where the god scatters the bones and they spring to life, encodes the ideal placement of incision points to avoid major blood vessels. Such narratives turned gore into mnemonics, making complex anatomy lessons stick through visceral imagery. Today, this ancient synergy of story and science is experiencing a revival. In Norway, doctors are collaborating with folklorists to decode Viking sagas for forgotten herbal knowledge, leading to the rediscovery of wound-healing moss species mentioned in the Poetic Edda. Meanwhile, the Tzeltal Maya of Mexico maintain a living library of healing stories, over 600 narratives catalogued by ethnomedical researchers, where every plot twist corresponds to diagnostic criteria. A tale about a deer spirit's erratic behavior might describe fever symptoms, while a river's sudden flooding mirrors inflammation patterns. What emerges is a radical idea. Perhaps Hippocrates wasn't medicine's first great teacher, but rather one of its last great storytellers. Before the Hippocratic Oath came the sung remedies. Before anatomy textbooks came the cautionary tales of angry bone spirits. And before clinical trials came generations of knowledge refined through oral transmission. These stories weren't primitive, they were the original peer-reviewed literature, tested across centuries by the most rigorous metric of all, survival. When a Maori Tohunga healer recites the chants of Tain Mahuta to identify bark for skin infections, or when a Lakota elder recounts the white buffalo calf woman's teachings on pain-relieving plants, they're not preserving folklore, they're maintaining living medical databases where every character is a symptom, every plot twist a treatment, and every happy ending a cure. Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare seems like a simple lesson about persistence, but peel back the layers and you'll find a masterclass in ecological strategy. The hare's reckless sprint represents unsustainable energy use burning through resources too quickly, while the tortoise's steady pace mirrors the slow, efficient metabolism of desert creatures adapted to scarcity. This wasn't just a moral tale, it was a survival guide disguised as entertainment, teaching ancient listeners how to thrive in environments where patience meant the difference between feast and famine. Native American animal stories took this concept even further. The Lakota legend of Iktomi the trickster spider isn't just about cleverness, it's a detailed study in predator-prey dynamics. When Iktomi outsmarts larger animals by weaving deceptive webs, the story encodes real observations about how spiders exploit insect behavior. Similarly, the Haida tale of ravens stealing sunlight from the sky isn't just a creation myth, it's a poetic explanation of seasonal light cycles, with ravens' flight path mirroring the sun's annual migration across the horizon. African folklore is equally rich with ecological wisdom. The Bantu story of the chameleon and the hare explains why some animals reproduce slowly while others multiply rapidly. The chameleon's methodical walk to deliver the message of eternal life contrasts with the hare's hasty dash bringing death, a metaphor for R selected versus K selected species strategies. Even the Zulu legend of the buffalo and the thorn tree encodes fire ecology. The buffalo's relentless destruction of the tree teaches how grazing patterns maintain grassland balance. What makes these stories so ingenious is their use of animal personalities as teaching tools. The arrogant lion in Aesop's fables doesn't just teach humility, he demonstrates apex predator dynamics, showing how overhunting leads to starvation. The Cherokee story of the possum playing dead isn't just comedy. It's a survival tactic observation wrapped in humor, making the lesson stick. By assigning human-like traits to animals, these tales created mental hooks for complex ecological principles, ensuring children remembered that wolves hunt in packs or that geese migrate in formation long before they ever saw those behaviors firsthand. Modern science confirms the accuracy hidden in these narratives. Researchers studying the Tsimain people of Bolivia found their animal fables contained precise details about jaguar hunting territories and peccary herd movements knowledge that matched GPS tracking data. Similarly, Aboriginal Australian stories about the firehawk birds raptors that spread wildfires to flush out prey were once dismissed as myth until scientists documented the behavior in the 21st century. These stories weren't guesses, they were the result of millennia of careful observation, distilled into unforgettable characters and plots. The brilliance of this system lies in its adaptability. Unlike rigid textbooks, oral stories could evolve with the environment. When European settlers introduced honeybees to North America, Navajo storytellers quickly incorporated them into existing bear and skunk tales, teaching proper hive harvesting techniques through humor. In the Arctic, Inuit shape-shifting myths about seals becoming human reflected actual observations of marine mammal physiology, their human-like eyes and breath-holding abilities woven into cautionary tales about sustainable hunting. Perhaps most remarkably, these fables often encoded entire food webs. The Ashanti story of Anansi the spider and his 6 sons doesn't just entertain. Each son represents a different survival strategy, like Sea Trouble, who spots predators, or Road Builder, who creates escape routes, collectively mapping an ecosystem's balance. Listeners absorbed lessons about biodiversity's importance without a single lecture, just through the spider's clever antics. Today, conservationists are rediscovering these narratives as tools for environmental education. In Mongolia, herders use traditional camel fables to teach grassland restoration, while Amazonian tribes employed jaguar stories to explain corridor conservation. The stories work because they speak to something deeper than data. They tap into the human brain's innate love for pattern and character, turning ecological principles into something felt rather than just understood. When a child laughs at Biara rabbit outsmarting the fox, they're not just hearing a joke, they're learning how prey species adapt to predation pressure, lesson by lesson, generation by generation, one unforgettable story at a time. Imagine setting sail across thousands of miles of open ocean with nothing but the stars above and the stories in your heart to guide you. That's exactly what Polynesian voyagers did for centuries, navigating the vast Pacific with astonishing accuracy, not by compass or chart, but through chants that mapped the sea itself. These weren't just songs, they were intricate mental atlases where every verse held clues about swells, winds, and the flight paths of birds. A master navigator, or wayfinder, could recite a chant describing the precise angle of waves near Tahiti or the color of clouds over Fiji, turning oral tradition into a living GPS system. Take the Hawaiian chant Cumulipo, a creation story that doubles as a nautical almanac. Its verses don't just describe gods and ancestors, they encode the rising positions of key stars like Folklore Arcturus and Hikyanelia Spica, which mark sailing seasons between islands. The rhythm of the chant mirrors the rhythm of the ocean, with pauses timed to represent intervals between wave sets. When navigators sang of the demigod Maui fishing up islands, they were also remembering how underwater currents distort around volcanic seamounts, creating telltale ripples at the surface. The genius of this system lay in its layers. A single voyage chant might weave together star paths, bird behavior, and wave mechanics into one seamless narrative. For example, the story of the god Lono's journey across the sea doesn't just recount his adventures, it teaches that certain terns fly out to fish at dawn and return to land by dusk, acting as natural compasses. Another chant about the mischievous moon goddess Hina describes how she creates shimmering moonlit paths on the water, a poetic way to remember that calm, reflective patches often indicate deep channels safe for sailing. Even the structure of these chants followed scientific principles. Polynesian navigators used a technique called etak, dividing the ocean into conceptual segments like chapters in a story. Each segment was associated with a specific star rising or setting on the horizon, and the chant's cadence would shift as the voyage progressed, mirroring the changing night sky. A navigator might sing of the tilapa of underwater lightning, a phenomenon where bioluminescent streaks reveal distant islands' locations, all while keeping time with the paddle strokes of the crew. Modern researchers have tested this oral science with jaw-dropping results. In the 1970s, the Folklore canoe sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional chants, no instruments, and arrived within miles of its target after 34 days at sea. Scientists found that the chant's descriptions of wave interference patterns near islands matched satellite data, proving these stories held hydrodynamic insights centuries before Western physics formalized them. Similarly, the Maori Warwananga schools of knowledge preserved star courses to New Zealand so accurately that their oral maps aligned with modern charts to within 2% error. What's truly humbling is how these stories adapted to environmental shifts. When volcanic eruptions altered coastlines or storms changed currents, new verses were added to the chants like software updates. The legend of the shark god Kamoholi, for instance, wasn't just a myth. It was a mnemonic for avoiding the treacherous currents where sharks congregated. If those currents shifted over generations, the story's details would too, ensuring the knowledge stayed relevant. Today, these navigational epics are experiencing a renaissance. Hawaiian schools now teach children star paths through chants about the voyaging canoe Folklore, while Marshallese sailors still use stick charts, knotted palm ribs mapping waves and winds as physical companions to their oral traditions. These stories remind us that science doesn't need to live in textbooks to be precise, and that the human voice, when trained by generations of observation, can carry the wisdom of the waves as clearly as any satellite signal. The next time you hear an old sailing tale, listen closely. You might just catch the rhythm of the ocean hiding in the words. Long before chalk met slate or scribes etched numbers into clay, mathematics lived in the human voice, rising and falling in chants that turned equations into earworms. The ancient Babylonians didn't just solve quadratic problems, they sang them, embedding geometric formulas into hymns to the goddess Ishtar. Each verse was a mnemonic device, its syllables counting out the steps to calculate the area of a field or the slope of a ziggurat. A single ritual chant might encode the Pythagorean theorem centuries before Pythagoras was born, with rhythmic stresses marking the lengths of a triangle's sides. These weren't just religious ceremonies, they were the world's first math classrooms, where melody became memory and devotion doubled as data storage. Vedic India took this fusion even further. The priests who composed the Sulba Sutras, a collection of geometric texts, didn't write them down for over 1,000 years. Instead, they recited precise instructions for altar construction in hypnotic meters, where every pause and pitch change corresponded to a measurement. To build a fire altar with an area 7.5 times its width, they'd chant in a specific cadence: 7 steps forward, turn right with the rising tone, 5 steps in the descending rhythm. The mathematics was so exact that modern engineers recreating these altars found deviations of less than 1% from the described dimensions. The secret lay in the poetry itself. The Sanskrit verses used alliteration and assonance to link steps together, creating neural hooks for flawless recall. Across the globe, the builders of Stonehenge likely relied on similar oral engineering. The monument's astronomical alignments, where certain stones frame the summer solstice sunrise, couldn't have been achieved without advanced geometry. Yet there's no evidence of written calculations from its creators. Instead, researchers suspect knowledge was passed down through stories linking stone placements to celestial events. The legend of the heel stone marking the sun's path may have been more than myth. It could have been a mnemonic for solstice angles, with the narrative structure mirroring the mathematical relationships. Even the act of transporting the massive blue stones might have been guided by chants. Welsh folk songs from the region describe rhythmic pulling techniques that match the optimal frequency for moving heavy loads without exhaustion. The brilliance of these systems lies in their multidimensional encoding. The Mayan calendar keepers, for instance, didn't just track time with numbers. They personified each day as a deity with distinct traits. The number 4 wasn't merely a digit. It was the god Kawil, associated with stability and the cardinal directions. This narrative approach allowed priests to perform complex calendar calculations through storytelling, where a tale about Kawil's journey might encode the mathematics of leap year adjustments. Similarly, the Norse used their runic alphabet as a computational tool, with each letter representing both a sound and a numeric value. Poems about Odin discovering the runes doubled as arithmetic lessons, where verses like "I know a 12th" hinted at fractional division through metaphor. Modern experiments reveal how effective these methods were. Cognitive scientists studying oral traditions in West Africa found that griots reciting mathematical epics could solve problems 3 times faster than control groups using written methods. The rhythm and rhyme acted as cognitive scaffolding, offloading working memory demands. Archaeologists reconstructing Inca quipu knotted string records discovered that the color patterns and knot placements followed narrative structures, with each string telling a numerical story about harvest yields or astronomical cycles. Even today, Tibetan monks memorize intricate mandala designs through song, their melodies mapping out geometric proportions with millimeter precision. What's often overlooked is how these traditions democratized knowledge. Without reliance on scarce writing materials or elite scribes, mathematical literacy flourished across entire communities. Children learning to herd cattle in ancient Mesopotamia would sing multiplication tables set to the bleating rhythms of sheep. Finnish farmers measured fields with Kelvala meter poems, where lines of specific lengths corresponded to acreage. The very act of turning math into music made it communal, something to be shared around fires rather than locked in scrolls. As we uncover more of these oral algorithms etched in folklore, a startling truth emerges. Our ancestors didn't just do mathematics. They lived it, breathed it, sang it into being. The next time you hum a catchy tune, consider that you're tapping into the same neural pathways that once carried the quadratic formula across millennia, proof that some equations are too important to be left on paper alone. For the Maori of New Zealand, time wasn't counted in days or months. It was woven into the very breath of their ancestors. Their Wakapapa genealogical chants stretched back over 40 generations, each name marking not just a person but an environmental milestone. When a chant mentioned the ancestor Rongamai, who sailed when the Pohutukawa bloomed, it wasn't poetic license, it was an oral almanac. The crimson flowers of that tree still erupt across coastal cliffs every December, just as they did when Rongamai's waka touched shore centuries ago, turning family history into a living seasonal clock. These chants didn't just preserve lineage, they synchronized human lives with the rhythms of nature, where the flowering of certain plants or the arrival of migratory birds became temporal anchors more reliable than any sundial. Meanwhile, high in the Andes, the Inca engineers of Machu Picchu achieved similar precision through their quippus knotted string records that might seem like simple accounting tools at first glance. But when paired with oral explanations from Quipucamayoc's keepers of the knots, these colorful chords transformed into four-dimensional calendars. A yellow string with 10 knots might represent the 10 days of a festival, while its position relative to a red string marked the winter solstice. The true genius lay in the stories that accompanied them. A keeper might recite how the sun god Intai wept golden tears during a drought year, while their fingers traced corresponding knots recording the exact month the rains failed. This fusion of tactile and oral memory created fail-safe. If the strings were lost, the story preserved the data, and vice versa. African cultures developed equally sophisticated systems. The Borana people of Kenya and Ethiopia still use their Cushitic calendar, a celestial oral map where star positions are memorized through pastoral poems. Their shepherds don't count days, they sing them with verses like, "When the triangulum rises at dawn, take the herds to the salt lick," encoding astronomical events. Researchers have found these oral calendars accurate to within hours over annual cycles, matching modern astronomical software predictions. Similarly, the Dogon people of Mali preserved knowledge of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, through intricate creation myths describing its 50-year orbital period around Sirius A, a fact Western astronomy only confirmed in the 19th century. The common thread in these systems is their resilience. When Spanish conquistadors burned Inca records, they couldn't erase the Quipu stories whispered between generations. When British colonists suppressed Maori language, the Wakapapa chants survived in hidden ceremonies. Unlike brittle parchments or fragile carvings, these oral calendars lived in the community's collective breath, adaptable yet precise. The Walpiri people of Australia demonstrate this perfectly with their Jukurpa dreaming stories. Certain narratives are only told when specific desert flowers bloom, some as rarely as once a decade, creating a biological trigger for knowledge transmission that no library fire could disrupt. Modern science is now catching up to these ancient insights. Chronobiologists studying circadian rhythms find that the Maori whale migration chants time to phases of the moon, align perfectly with marine animals' biological clocks. Archaeoastronomers discovered that the Inca's oral SEC system, describing sacred pathways from Cusco, actually mapped an enormous stone calendar, with each shrine marking a different astronomical event. Perhaps most remarkably, linguists found that the Tzolk'in calendar of the Maya, long thought preserved only in codices, survived orally in Guatemalan villages through day-counting chants with the same 19-month structure used during the classic Maya period. What emerges is a radical redefinition of what calendars can be. These weren't just tools for marking time, they were ecological contracts, binding human activity to environmental cycles through narrative. When a Lakota elder recounts how the story of white buffalo calf woman corresponds with the August meteor showers, or when a Polynesian navigator chants about Maui slowing the sun during winter solstice, they're not preserving folklore. They're maintaining ancient agreements between humanity and the cosmos. written not in ink but in the most durable medium of all the stories we tell each other under the turning stars. Daedalus didn't just build a labyrinth, he wove its secrets into a story so vivid, it outlasted the stones of Knossos itself. The Greek myth of the master craftsman and his impossible maze isn't just a tale of minotaurs and treachery. It's a masterclass in structural engineering disguised as folklore. When the legend describes winding passages that shift like the coils of a serpent, it's encoding a real architectural technique, the use of staggered walls to distribute seismic forces, an innovation that kept Minoan palaces standing through earthquakes. The story's climax, where Theseus follows a thread to escape, mirrors the precise geometric ratios ancient builders used to navigate complex spaces, turning mythology into a mnemonic for proportional design. Half a world away, the Dogon people of Mali preserved even more astonishing technical knowledge through oral tradition. Their creation epic of the Nummo amphibious beings who brought civilization contains startlingly accurate details about iron smelting. When the story describes the Nummo weaving fire and earth into shining threads, it's teaching the step-by-step process of bloomery furnace operation, layering charcoal and iron ore like fabric, then controlling airflow to achieve the perfect temperature. Modern metallurgists found these narrative instructions so precise that replicating them produced high-quality steel, no written manuals required. The brilliance of these systems lies in their layered metaphors. Consider the Hindu myth of Vishwakarma, the divine architect whose floating palaces danced on the wind. This poetic image actually encodes principles of cantilevered construction and harmonic dampening seen in ancient Indian temples. The story's description of pillars that sang when struck isn't fantasy, it's a quality control technique still used by stonemasons today, where the resonance of a tapped column reveals internal fractures. Similarly, the Navajo story of Spider-Woman weaving her cosmic web mirrors the structural integrity of basket-weave masonry patterns used in their cliff dwellings, with each narrative not representing a load-bearing joint. Perhaps most remarkable is how these stories traveled. The West African tale of the blacksmith who married the wind to forge unbreakable swords spread across continents, adapting to local materials. In Ghana, it became a recipe for tropical hardwood charcoal. In Morocco, a guide to quenching blades in desert sand. By the time the story reached medieval Europe as the legend of Whale and the Smith, it carried centuries of metallurgical refinements, like differential hardening techniques, hidden in plain sight as magical feats. Modern engineers are now decoding these narrative blueprints. When architects rebuilt Nepal's earthquake-damaged temples, they turned to Vedic hymns describing mountains stacked upon clouds, a metaphor for the flexible timber lattice foundations that make traditional pagodas tremor-resistant. Archaeologists recreating Roman concrete found their answer in Ovid's Metamorphoses, where the phrase, "liquid stone that drank the sea," pointed to the volcanic ash and seawater formula we'd forgotten for millennia. Even Da Vinci's notebooks pale next to the Aboriginal story of Bayame, whose fishing net stretched across the sky perfectly diagrams the tension principles behind Sydney's Harbour Bridge. What emerges is a revelation. Our ancestors didn't just build, they storified. Every arch, every alloy, every city plan was wrapped in narrative DNA, ensuring knowledge survived not in fragile parchment but in the most robust medium of all, the human imagination. The next time you hear an old legend about gods shaping the world, listen closer. You might just catch the whisper of a chisel or the rhythm of a forge, passed down through generations as something far more powerful than instructions, as a story that refuses to be forgotten. The flood that drowned the world in the Epic of Gilgamesh wasn't just a metaphor, it was likely a geological memory, etched into legend by survivors of rising waters 12,000 years ago. When the Babylonian hero Utnapishtim builds an ark to weather the deluge, his story mirrors real sediment cores from the Persian Gulf that show catastrophic flooding as glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age. But here's what's astonishing. Identical flood myths emerged independently across continents, from the Aboriginal story of the rainbow serpent flooding the land to the Maya tale of the great storm sent by Huracan. These weren't coincidences, they were oral survival maps, preserving the trauma of ancient climate change in narrative amber. Take the Klamath people of the Pacific Northwest, whose legend of the volcano god Lao describes the eruption of Mount Mazama 7,000 years ago with chilling precision. The story recounts how Lao's fiery temper collapsed the mountain into itself, forming what we now call Crater Lake. Modern geologists compared the oral account with volcanic deposits and found the Klamath description of pyroclastic flows and ash layers matched the scientific record to within decades. Similarly, the Gunditjmara people of Australia still sing about Budgebim, a volcano that erupted over 30,000 years ago. Their creation story describes lava rivers so accurately that archaeologists used it to locate ancient eel traps buried under the flows. What makes these stories so powerful is their predictive value. The Inuit legend of Sela, the spirit of the air who grows angry when the land is mistreated, contains detailed descriptions of permafrost thaw and erratic weather patterns now recognized as hallmarks of Arctic climate change. When elders warned that the ice remembers, they were articulating a principle modern science confirms. Ice cores preserve millennia of atmospheric data. Even the biblical plagues of Egypt, once dismissed as allegory, now read like a climate report, the Nile turning to blood aligning with toxic algal blooms from sudden warming, while locust swarms mirror insect population explosions linked to drought. These narratives did more than record disasters, they encoded adaptation strategies. The Cherokee story of the Great Drought tells how the people survived by following the behavior of crayfish, who dug deeper into creek beds to find water. Today, hydrologists have confirmed that crustacean burrows reliably indicate groundwater depth. Likewise, the Andean myth of Pachamama withdrawing her bounty during El Niño events taught farmers to recognize early signs of the climate pattern by observing seabird migrations, a technique still used by Peruvian fishermen. Nowhere is this more striking than in the Dogon tribe's astronomical traditions. Their oral histories describe a time when the star Sirius appeared red, a detail astronomers now attribute to the companion star Sirius B being a red giant before collapsing into a white dwarf over 70,000 years ago. The Dogon didn't just witness this cosmic event, they wove it into their agricultural calendar, linking its memory to cycles of drought and rainfall that still hold true today. As modern climate scientists grapple with unprecedented changes, they're turning to these ancient narratives for clues. When Rapa Nui elders speak of their ancestors witnessing the Great Drying, their descriptions of shifting trade winds align perfectly with paleoclimate models of the Little Ice Age. The Yupik people's warnings about thin ice from a century ago now inform permafrost melt studies in Alaska. These stories remind us that indigenous knowledge isn't folklore, it's a millennia-deep data set, where every metaphor is a measurement, every character a variable, and every plot twist a planetary signal we're only now learning to read. The next time you hear an old tale about the earth shaking or the seas rising, don't dismiss it as fantasy, listen closely. That story might just be the most advanced climate model we have, refined across generations and waiting for the right moment to share its warning once more. The mighty Yggdrasil wasn't just a fanciful tree in Norse mythology. It was a living field guide to Scandinavia's ecosystem. When Viking skalds described this world tree, with roots tapping 3 sacred springs and branches sheltering 9 realms. They were encoding precise botanical knowledge. The root in Niflheim's icy waters, that's the hardy birch, able to thrive in frozen soil. The branch sheltering Asgard's golden halls, the sun-loving oak. Even the squirrel Ratatoska running up and down the trunk carried meaning. His frantic trips mirrored the seasonal transport of seeds by forest creatures, a poetic lesson in forest regeneration. Hindu traditions took this fusion of botany and belief even further. The mysterious soma plant mentioned over 1,000 times in the Rigveda wasn't just a divine drink. It was likely a complex pharmacopoeia disguised as mythology. Modern ethnobotanists have identified at least 14 candidate plants matching soma's described effects, from the psychedelic fly agaric mushroom to the stimulating ephedra vine. The hymns describe preparation methods with scientific precision, pressed between stones for certain roots, steeped in moonlight for others, techniques we now know preserve different active compounds. When the texts say Indra gained strength from soma, they're preserving ancient knowledge about which plants boost endurance or induce visionary states, wrapped in tales of gods and demons. This symbolic science appears across cultures. The Egyptian lotus that emerges each morning from Nun's primordial waters isn't just a pretty image, it's a masterclass in hydrophytic plant biology. Its daily cycle of submerged roots and emergent flowers taught observers about aquatic photosynthesis and seasonal flooding patterns. Similarly, the Cherokee story of Selu, the corn mother whose body sprouted maize when she died, encodes the entire agricultural process, the blood from her wounds representing nitrogen-rich soil amendments, her buried body symbolizing seed depth. Even the direction her face was turned east marked the optimal planting orientation for catching morning sun. What makes these plant stories so enduring is their layered teaching methods. The Greek myth of Daphne transforming into a laurel tree to escape Apollo seems like simple fantasy until you learn that bay laurel leaves contain analgesic compounds ancient healers used for pain relief. The metamorphosis narrative ensured apprentices would remember which plant to reach for when treating wounds. The Aboriginal tale of the Warata flower blooming where a warrior fell encodes fire ecology. This Australian native actually requires bushfire smoke to germinate, a fact preserved through generations in the story's imagery of rebirth from ashes. Today, researchers are decoding these living libraries. When ethnobotanists followed the Maya tree of life descriptions in the Popol Vuh, they discovered each sacred tree corresponded to a specific ecological niche, ceiba for floodplains, mahogany for upland forests guiding sustainable harvesting. The Celtic Ogham alphabet, where each letter represents a tree, turns out to be a phenological calendar. The birch Beth marking New Year aligns with its early spring budburst. Even the biblical burning bush may reference dictamnus, a desert plant that emits volatile oils capable of igniting in extreme heat, a survival adaptation turned divine symbol. These stories did more than preserve facts, they fostered reverence. By making plants characters in cosmic dramas, our ancestors ensured each generation would approach them with respect. The Lakota still gather sweetgrass today following the legend of the buffalo teaching its use, while the Japanese revere sakura through the Shinto tale of the tree that bloomed where a goddess descended. In a world facing biodiversity loss, perhaps we need these old stories more than ever, not just for their knowledge, but for the wisdom that some truths take root deepest when wrapped in wonder. The sly fox stealing chickens in Aesop's fables wasn't just a moral lesson about greed. It was a detailed study in predator tactics. Ancient storytellers noticed how real foxes hunt at dawn when coops are unguarded, and they wrapped that observation in a narrative so sticky, it survived millennia. The fox's reputation for cunning isn't just folklore. It's field biology in disguise, encoding everything from diversionary tactics to problem-solving skills observed in actual vulpine behavior. Native American traditions took this further with the crow, a bird revered not just for its intelligence but for its ecological role as a cleanup crew. The Haida story of raven stealing sunlight isn't merely a creation myth, it's a lesson in corvid adaptability, showing how these birds exploit opportunities others miss. When the tale describes raven fluffing his feathers to mimic eagles, it echoes real-life observations of crows using deception to scavenge from larger predators. Even the Hopi story of crow bringing fire to humanity mirrors the bird's known attraction to campfires, where it forages for insects fleeing the heat. African animal lore reveals even deeper layers. The Zulu tale of the chameleon losing its voice isn't just about shyness, it's a poetic explanation of reptilian physiology. The stories claim that chameleons swallow their words, describes the actual throat puffing they use to regulate body temperature. Similarly, the San People's stories of the praying mantis holding perfectly still for days encode predator ambush strategies, while the Bambara fable of the hyena's laugh teaches about scavenger hierarchy at kills. What's remarkable is how accurately these stories track across continents. The Cherokee tale of the rabbit's split lip punishment for stealing water parallels European stories about hares' sneaky drinking habits. Both cultures noticed how lagomorphs lick dew off grass rather than risking open water sources, turning the observation into cautionary tales about resourcefulness. Even the Inuit legend of the seal offering itself to hungry hunters reflects genuine pinniped behavior. Their curious nature makes them approach boats, a trait that became sacred in storytelling. Modern ethologists are now rediscovering the science in these narratives. Researchers studying wolf packs found that the Lakota story of the lone wolf who sang out of turn describes actual beta wolf vocalization patterns disrupting group coordination. The Aboriginal tale of the kangaroo mother hiding her joey in dense brush matches recent footage of marsupials using vegetation as visual barriers. These stories weren't guesses, they were the result of generations of patient observation, distilled into characters so vivid, the lessons became unforgettable. Perhaps no creature demonstrates this better than the spider. From Anansi in West Africa to grandmother spider in Navajo tradition, these eight-legged engineers appear universally as tricksters and teachers. The stories capture everything from web architecture Anansi's woven words mirroring silk's tensile strength, to hunting strategies like the Ojibwe tale of spider dropping on a thread to ambush prey. When scientists recently discovered that some spiders vibrate webs to mimic insect wing beats, they were confirming what indigenous stories had described for centuries through metaphors. These narratives did more than entertain, they created mental models for ecological relationships. The Chinese parable of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the aureole behind it, doesn't just warn against tunnel vision. It perfectly illustrates food chain dynamics. The Amazonian story of the jaguar and the tortoise, where the cat's claws get stuck in the shell, teaches predator-prey coevolution through drama. Even Aesop's grasshopper and ant, often reduced to a simple laziness lesson, originally contained precise details about orthopteran life cycles, how grasshoppers thrive in abundance but perish when seasons change, while ants' collective storage strategies ensure survival. Today, conservationists are harnessing this ancient wisdom. Wildlife biologists in Botswana use San People's fables about porcupine quills to teach livestock guards about predator deterrence, while Canadian rangers employ Inuit polar bear stories to explain climate-driven behavioral shifts. The stories work because they speak a universal language, one where every flick of a fox's tail or croak of a raven carries volumes of knowledge, waiting for those who know how to listen. The Philosopher's Stone wasn't just a legend, it was the ultimate lab manual disguised as a fairy tale. When medieval alchemists wrote of turning lead into gold, they weren't just chasing riches, they were documenting real chemical processes like alloying metals or purifying ores, wrapped in symbolic language to protect their secrets from prying eyes. Take the famous green lion devouring the sun from European alchemy, a cryptic image that actually describes dissolving gold with aqua regia, the acid mixture that turns the metal into a greenish solution. The lion represented the corrosive acid, while the sun stood for gold itself, a code understood by initiates but meaningless to outsiders. Chinese alchemy took this further with the quest for the elixir of immortality. The Taoist story of the 8 immortals brewing potions in jade vessels wasn't just fantasy, it was a step-by-step guide to distillation and sublimation techniques. The cinnabar furnace mentioned in these tales referred to mercury sulfide processing, where heating the red mineral released quicksilver, a substance both deadly and mesmerizing. By framing these dangerous experiments as divine pursuits, alchemists ensured apprentices would approach them with reverence and caution, remembering safety protocols through metaphors like the dragon's breath for toxic fumes. Even the colors in alchemical myths carried precise meanings. The black crow phase described the charring of organic matter, the white swan symbolized purification through calcination, and the peacock's tail marked the iridescent hues of oxidizing metals, all stages in creating alloys or medicines. The Arabian alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyun's story of the Emerald Tablet hid recipes for acids in its poetic verses, like "the wind carried it in its belly," referring to condensing vapors in glass alembics. These weren't just pretty phrases, they were mnemonics for temperature control and apparatus setup, ensuring techniques survived even when workshops were raided or texts burned. The brilliance of this system lay in its adaptability. When the Spanish Inquisition banned alchemical texts, practitioners simply rewrote them as biblical allegories. The marriage of the Red King and White Queen became the union of sulfur and mercury, key ingredients for making sulfuric acid disguised as a sacred union. Similarly, Hindu Rasayana texts described the gods churning the ocean of milk to produce Amrita, the nectar of immortality. This vivid image encoded the process of churning lime with milk to extract calcium compounds, a technique still used in traditional medicine. Modern chemists are now decoding these narrative formulas. When researchers recreated the volatile serpent experiment from a 15th century German manuscript, a tale about a winged serpent escaping its glass prison, they realized it described distilling ethanol to extreme purity. The serpent's flight represented the rising vapor, while the glass mountain was the cooling coil. Even Isaac Newton's alchemical notes, long dismissed as eccentricities, contain accurate formulas for metal refining hidden in his interpretations of the Hercules myth. What emerges is a revelation. Alchemy wasn't proto-science stumbling in the dark. It was science in survival mode, cloaked in stories to outlast persecution and time. The next time you hear an old tale about magic stones or elixirs, listen closer. That Sorcerer's Brew might just be the world's first chemistry textbook, whispering its formulas through the ages in the only language durable enough to carry them: storytelling. When Pele, the Hawaiian goddess of fire, hurled flaming boulders at her sister Namakakahai, she wasn't just battling a water spirit, she was etching a geologic textbook into the collective memory of her people. The chants describing their epic fight across the Hawaiian Islands mirror the actual progression of volcanic activity from oldest to youngest islands, with each explosive encounter corresponding to documented eruptions. The legend says Pele dug her fire pit deeper with each defeat, moving from Kauai to Oahu to Maui before settling in Kilauea, a perfect allegory for the Pacific Plate's northwest drift over a stationary hotspot. Today, geologists compare these oral histories with radiometric dating and find the sequence matches almost exactly, proving these stories weren't just metaphors but meticulous records of deep time. Across the Pacific, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories perform similar feats. The tale of the rainbow serpent shaping valleys as it slithered across the land explains erosion patterns so accurately that modern hydrologists use these narratives to locate ancient riverbeds. In the Flinders Ranges, the Adnyamathanha people's story about the ancestral being Akaru drinking all the water from a giant lake aligns with geological evidence of a Pleistocene-era inland sea's disappearance. When elders sing of the serpent's body forming mountain ranges, they're preserving observations about fold mountain formation that would take Western science centuries to formalize. The precision becomes even more striking when examining fossil lore. The Navajo story of the monster slayer turning defeated creatures to stone isn't just fantasy, it's a paleontological record. Specific details about these stone monsters match dinosaur fossils found in the region, like the deer that runs with its head down, resembling the posture of a fossilized triceratops. Similarly, the ancient Greek Cyclops myth likely originated from dwarf elephant skulls found in Mediterranean caves, their single nasal cavity mistaken for an eye socket. These stories acted as prehistoric museum labels, ensuring curious future generations would remember where and how to find these mineralized wonders. What's truly remarkable is how these narratives predicted scientific discoveries. The Maori legend of Tain separating earth and sky to let in light describes plate tectonics in poetic terms, the trembling world, and the great cleaving mirroring continental rifting. Modern seismic studies confirm that New Zealand's Alpine Fault, where the Pacific and Australian plates meet, has produced exactly the kind of massive separations described in these stories. Similarly, Icelandic sagas about the giant Surtur setting the world aflame may encode memories of catastrophic volcanic events like the Eldgjá eruption of the 10th century, which literally turned the sky red across Europe for years. These geologic stories share a common genius. They turn abstract processes into visceral experiences. The Andean myth of Pachacamac shaking the earth in anger doesn't just explain earthquakes, it teaches seismic safety through narrative. The story's description of the god first rumbling like a distant storm, then striking like a puma, mirrors the P-wave and S-wave sequence seismologists now warn about. When told around fires, these tales became early disaster drills, with each dramatic gesture reinforcing survival tactics. Stand near doorframes when the gods argue, flee to high ground when the sea draws breath. Today, scientists are collaborating with indigenous storytellers to decode more of these geologic archives. Geomorphologists studying Australia's Budgebim volcano found that local Gunditjmara stories about the eruption contain details about lava flow directions that match recent LiDAR surveys. In the American Southwest, Hopi prophecies about the Earth twisting are helping seismologists identify previously unknown fault lines. These partnerships reveal what our ancestors always knew, that the land itself has a story to tell, and sometimes the most scientific truth comes wrapped in the oldest tales. The hero's journey isn't just a template for epic adventures, it's a masterclass in human psychology, carved into narrative stone thousands of years before Freud coined the term ego. When Odysseus wrestles with the Cyclops or Gilgamesh confronts his mortality, these aren't just thrilling plot twists. They're ancient case studies in decision-making under pressure, grief processing, and the toll of unchecked ambition. Every mentor figure like Homer's Athena or the Arthurian Merlin embodies what we now recognize as cognitive scaffolding, guiding the protagonist and the listener through stages of problem solving, from frustration to insight. These stories didn't just describe psychological struggles, they provided roadmaps for navigating them, with archetypes acting as universal symbols for mental states we all experience. Trickster tales reveal even deeper layers of early psychological observation. The Norse Loki, the Anansi spider of West Africa, and the Native American coyote aren't just mischief makers, they're studies in cognitive flexibility and adaptive behavior. When Anansi outsmarts larger animals with wit rather than strength, the story teaches listeners about lateral thinking and resourcefulness. The Aztec god Tezcatlipoca's habit of holding a smoking mirror to mortals mirrors modern therapy techniques, forcing self-reflection by confronting characters with uncomfortable truth. Even the humble Beara rabbit who pleads, "Don't throw me in that briar patch," demonstrates reverse psychology so perfectly that the tale survives as a therapeutic tool in some African American communities today. What's remarkable is how these myths anticipated modern psychological concepts. The Greek story of Narcissus staring at his reflection predates clinical discussions of narcissism by millennia, while the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh explores the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, long before Kubler-Ross defined them. The Hindu parable of the blind men and the elephant doesn't just warn against limited perspectives, it illustrates cognitive bias and the construction of subjective reality, showing how individual experiences shape wildly different interpretations of the same truth. These narratives also served as early mental health interventions. The Maori story of Moi slowing the sun encodes strategies for managing overwhelm. The demigod's act of lengthening the day represents breaking tasks into manageable portions. Inuit mothers still tell children about the sea goddess Sedna's tangled hair to explain intrusive thoughts, teaching that careful combing and processing prevents emotional knots. Even the biblical Job suffering follows what we now recognize as trauma response patterns, with his friends' reactions modeling both helpful and harmful coping mechanisms for those supporting sufferers. Modern psychology is now rediscovering the therapeutic power of these ancient frameworks. Jungian analysts use the hero's journey to map personal growth, while narrative therapists help patients rewrite life stories using mythic structures. The Cherokee Two Wolves parable about internal conflict has been adapted into evidence-based treatments for addiction. These timeless tales endure because they speak to something fundamental in our neural wiring: the need to make sense of our struggles through story, to see our fears reflected in a hero's trials, and to find hope in the promise that transformation follows the darkest chapters. When we tell these stories today, we're not just preserving folklore, we're keeping alive humanity's first and most enduring exploration of the mysterious landscape within. Viking skalds didn't just recite poetry, they weaponized rhythm to etch entire legal codes into memory. Their alliterative verses like Efjörl ek frida, fram se ek lengra weren't artistic flourishes but cognitive anchors, where each repeated consonant sound pinned down a clause of Norse law. The Drottfeet meter's strict 8-syllable lines and internal rhymes created a neural grid: miss a word, and the rhythm collapsed like a misfired rune carving. These weren't mere performances, they were acoustic mnemonics where the punch of a hard K might mark the start of a property statute, while a rolling R signaled inheritance rules. Modern experiments show this technique boosts recall by up to 60%, proving why Icelandic sagas could accurately preserve 800-year-old land disputes without a single parchment. Meanwhile, along the Niger River, West African griots were perfecting an even more sophisticated system. Their epic of Sundiata Keita, a 7-hour sung history of the Mali Empire, functioned like a living spreadsheet. Each melodic phrase corresponded to data points, a descending minor third for drought years, a pentatonic run for military victories. The griots, ngoni lute strings weren't just instruments, they were tactile indices with different tunings triggering memory palaces. Pluck the third string in bemonen mode, and the musician accessed agricultural records, switched to Fasa tuning, and genealogies unfolded. Researchers found these oral archives so precise that when matched against Timbuktu's surviving manuscripts, the sung tax records for 14th century salt caravans deviated by less than 3%. The secret lay in what neuroscientists now call multisensory encoding. The Maori of New Zealand paired their Wakapapa genealogical chants with synchronized hand gestures, each finger motion representing a generation, each palm turn marking migration routes. Polynesian navigational chants integrated olfactory cues. Certain phrases were always sung while smelling coconut oil, linking star courses to scent memory. Even the Cherokee Booger dance combined complex footwork with lyrical animal classifications, turning a social ritual into a biological database where every stomp and verse reinforced taxonomic relationships. These techniques exploited universal cognitive quirks. The brain's dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, responsible for working memory, lights up when information is paired with melody, allowing West African griots to recall 10 generations of rulers as effortlessly as humming a tune. The serial position effect, which makes humans remember list beginnings and endings best, explains why Viking legal verses placed key clauses at the start and finish of stanzas. Even the Kalulai people of Papua New Guinea's Gizolo ceremonies, where sung maps describe rainforest ecology, leverage the method of loci, the same memory palace technique used by modern memory champions. Today, this ancient harmony of music and memory is experiencing a digital age revival. Swedish hospitals use Norse skaldic meters to teach medical students drug interactions, while Senegalese coders adapt griot melodic algorithms for data compression. The next time you absent-mindedly sing your Wi-Fi password or chant a locker combination, you're tapping into humanity's oldest information technology, one where every note is a neuron firing, every rhythm a neural pathway, and every song a library that never burns. The graceful arc of an Aboriginal dancer's arm tracing the flight path of a honeybee isn't just performance, it's precision navigation data made physical. For the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land, every undulating movement in their Bungal ceremonies maps the landscape with startling accuracy. When dancers mimic kangaroos thumping the ground in drought, their footwork's tempo corresponds to the actual frequency of the animal's warning signals, a rhythmic code that once told listeners when to seek water sources. The sway of their bodies mirrors eucalyptus branches bending in seasonal winds, while sudden leaps mark the locations of hidden soakages. These dances weren't entertainment. They were geospatial libraries where each motion stored coordinates, ecological relationships, and survival strategies. The complexity of this living database becomes clear when examining the Walpiri fire dance of Central Australia. Dancers create concentric circles with their footsteps, not just representing flames, but encoding the ideal burn patterns for grassland regeneration. The speed of their rotations indicates wind direction during controlled burns, while hand gestures show which plant species resprout fastest after fire. Modern ecologists comparing these dances with satellite images of traditional fire management areas found the choreography predicted regrowth patterns with 93% accuracy. Even the dancer's body paint tells a story. White dots might symbolize termite mounds indicative of groundwater, while zigzag lines trace the migratory routes of desert rain birds. Polynesian wayfinding dances reveal similar sophistication. The Hawaiian hula noho, performed while seated, isn't just about storytelling. Its subtle hip sways and finger flutters mirror ocean swells and star compass bearings. Dancers' knees become horizons, their fingertips representing celestial bodies rising and setting. The rhythmic chanting accompanying the movements provides additional layers. The pauses between words corresponding to wave intervals, the volume shifts indicating current strength. When anthropologists worked with surviving practitioners in the 1980s, they discovered these dances could guide voyagers hundreds of miles using only embodied knowledge, no instruments required. Perhaps most astonishing are the Ainu bear ceremonies of Japan. Dancers' movements don't just honor the animal, they document its entire life cycle. A slow, heavy gait shows winter hibernation patterns, quick pivots mimic salmon catching techniques, and specific head tilts indicate berry gathering seasons. The dance's structure follows the lunar calendar, with each segment representing a month in the bear's annual cycle. Modern wildlife biologists found these performances contain day-to-matching GPS-tracked bear movements to within 5 kilometers, knowledge preserved for centuries without a single written record. What makes dance such an effective storage medium is its multisensory nature. The Maasai Adumu, or jumping dance, isn't just a test of strength. The height and landing impact communicate information about soil density and grazing quality. Hard, dusty land requires higher jumps, signaling poor pastures, while soft, grassy terrain allows lower leaps, indicating fertile areas. Dancers' beaded collars rattle at frequencies that mimic beneficial rainfall patterns, creating an acoustic memory trigger. Similarly, the Navajo shoe game dances encode medicinal plant knowledge, the shuffling steps tracing the shapes of leaves, the rhythm matching preparation times for poultices. Today, scientists are collaborating with indigenous communities to decode these kinetic encyclopedias. Australian researchers used Aboriginal emu dance sequences to locate ancient nesting sites, while Alaskan Inuit whaling dances helped marine biologists reconstruct 19th-century migration routes. In West Africa, the intricate footwork of Yoruba, Ijo Ogrov R-Igrov letter 1E63, dances revealed forgotten trade routes when matched with soil composition analysis. These partnerships highlight a profound truth, that some of humanity's most durable storage devices weren't carved in stone or written on parchment, but written in muscle memory and passed down through generations, one sacred step at a time. The ochre handprints dotting the walls of El Castillo cave in Spain aren't just prehistoric graffiti, they're the earliest known infographics, pulsing with layered meaning. When Paleolithic artists pressed their palms against stone some 40,000 years ago, the negative spaces left behind did more than announce, "I was here." Recent studies suggest these prints cluster near acoustic hotspots in caves, mapping resonance points where chants would amplify, a sonic user manual for ritual spaces. The famous Lascaux bull paintings take this further. Their precise placement corresponds to lunar cycles, with certain animals only visible under moonlight filtering through cracks during specific seasons. These weren't random decorations, they were multimedia installations combining visual cues, celestial timing, and oral tradition into a survival curriculum. Chumash rock art along California's coast reveals even more sophisticated data visualization. Their concentric circle petroglyphs, long dismissed as abstract designs, actually encode celestial events. When researchers overlaid the carvings with star charts, they matched the supernova explosion of the year 1054, a cosmic event visible for weeks that the Chumash recorded as a sun with rays symbol. Nearby zigzag lines mirror local fault zones, while fish motifs appear disproportionately near freshwater seeps, acting as hydrological markers. The real genius lies in how these images worked with oral lore. A shaman might point to a painted seal while singing about its migration patterns, transforming static art into an augmented reality experience where image, story, and landscape intertwined. Australian Aboriginal dot paintings take this synergy to another level. What outsiders once mistook for decorative patterns are actually topographic maps, each dot representing waterholes, each line a songline route. The Kunwinjku people's rack cross-hatching isn't just aesthetic. It's a cryptographic system where density and direction indicate seasonal resource locations. A painting might show honey ant nests through specific dot clusters while concealing sacred sites through deliberate omissions, a visual need-to-know system. When anthropologists worked with elders in the 1970s, they discovered these artworks could guide uninitiated viewers across hundreds of miles of desert using only the revealed layers of information. The Nazca lines of Peru demonstrate how scale amplified this ancient data storage. Those massive geoglyphs visible only from altitude aren't just artwork, they're a landscape-scale interface. The monkey glyph's spiraling tail mirrors the nearby river's oxbow bends, while the hummingbird's beak points to mountain springs during the December solstice. Researchers recently found that walking the line's paths triggers distinct auditory echoes, suggesting they were pilgrimage routes with built-in sonic waypoints. Combine this with oral traditions about the walking gods, and suddenly these desert etchings transform into an immersive navigation system, where feet, voice, and vision worked in concert to preserve geographical knowledge across generations. What unites these examples is their multimodal brilliance. The San people's rock art in southern Africa often appears beside thumb pianos, stone slabs that produce different tones when struck. Certain paintings only make complete sense when viewed while hearing specific notes, creating a mnemonic fusion of sight and sound. Similarly, Inuit ivory carvings of polar bears often feature intentional grooves, not just decorative, but tactile guides for teaching hunting anatomy through touch. The bear's shoulder joint might align with a groove indicating optimal spear angles, turning art into an interactive training manual. Today, archaeologists are using augmented reality to reconstruct these ancient interfaces. At France's Chauvet Cave, projections now show how torchlight flickering across painted lions created the illusion of movement, a Paleolithic animation teaching predation strategies. In Arizona, apps overlay Hohokam petroglyphs with oral histories, revealing how rabbit glyphs marked ephemeral water sources. These projects underscore what our ancestors knew instinctively, that the most durable knowledge lies not in single media, but in the spaces between image, story, and experience. The next time you see ancient art, look closer. Those strokes and spirals might just be waiting for the right voice, the right light, or the right hand to wake their sleeping data. The intricate sand paintings of the Navajo aren't just beautiful art, they're living textbooks where every colored grain holds a lesson. When medicine men create these temporary masterpieces during healing ceremonies, they're not just illustrating sacred stories, they're mapping the cosmos. The central cross in many designs doesn't merely symbolize the four directions, it mirrors the ecliptic plane, the sun's path through the zodiac, with specific colors marking solstice and equinox points. As singers chant the creation story, their fingers trace constellations in the sand, embedding astronomical knowledge in a ritual so vivid. Apprentices remember star positions as easily as recalling a gripping tale. But the real genius lies in the painting's impermanence. By destroying each artwork after use, the Navajo ensured this knowledge couldn't be stolen or corrupted. It had to be constantly relearned through participation, keeping the science alive in living memory rather than brittle parchment. Egyptian temple rituals took this embodied learning even further. The seemingly ceremonial act of pharaohs striking the temple ground with a golden rod wasn't just theater. It was practical engineering encoded in sacred drama. The exact spots where the rod struck corresponded to resonance points architects used to test foundation stability, a technique modern engineers have rediscovered through acoustic archaeology. When priests processed in precise formations around Denderah's temple columns, their footsteps followed the Fibonacci sequence, teaching mathematical proportions through movement. Even the raising of obelisks became a ritualized physics lesson. The chants describing the god's finger touching earth matched the angle of counterweight systems, turning mythology into a manual for megalithic construction. This fusion of ritual and science appears globally. The Hopi butterfly dance, with its intricate back and forth motions, doesn't just honor pollinators, it encodes wind patterns crucial for dryland farming. Dancers' zigzag steps mirror the flight paths of moths that signal upcoming rain, while the rattle's tempo indicates optimal seed planting intervals. Similarly, the Tibetan monks who spend weeks creating mandalas only to sweep them away aren't just demonstrating impermanence, they're preserving complex geometric algorithms. The precise placement of each colored grain follows tantric mathematical texts, with concentric circles representing fractal equations long before Western science coined the term. What unites these traditions is their multisensory brilliance. The Aboriginal corroboree ceremonies combine dance, song, and body paint to teach ecology. The white dots on a dancer's chest might represent a star map, while their stomping feet mimic the vibrations of approaching kangaroo herds. Amazonian shamans' ayahuasca rituals encode botanical knowledge in Icaro's spirit songs, where specific melodies describe plant combinations effects, a musical pharmacy passed down through generations. Even the Christian Eucharist holds echoes of this practice. The precise measurements of water and wine in Byzantine rites mirrored ancient Greek medical ratios for fever remedies, turning communion into a stealth health lesson. Modern science is now catching up to these ancient teaching methods. Neuroscientists studying the Maori haka found its synchronized movements and chants activate memory centers more effectively than rote learning. Architects are reviving Egyptian temple acoustics for modern concert halls after realizing how ritual chants reverberations enhanced recall. Perhaps most remarkably, researchers working with Navajo healers discovered that recreating sand paintings from memory engages the same brain networks as GPS navigation, proving these rituals didn't just describe knowledge but literally rewired minds to hold it. The next time you witness an ancient ceremony, look beyond the surface drama. Those chants, dances, and fleeting artworks might just be humanity's most durable hard drives, sophisticated data storage systems where every gesture is a byte, every melody a server, and every participant an essential node in the network keeping wisdom alive across millennia. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in morning, shepherd's warning might sound like simple folk poetry, but this ancient proverb is actually a remarkably accurate barometer hiding in plain sight. The rhyme encodes precise atmospheric optics. When dust particles scatter sunlight at dusk, creating crimson hues, it typically indicates high pressure and stable air coming from the west, ideal for grazing. Conversely, morning redness signals moisture-laden eastern air foretelling rain. This isn't just rustic wisdom, it's observational science distilled into 14 syllables, a mnemonic so effective it appears in nearly identical forms from biblical times to Chinese dynasties to Viking sagas. What's fascinating is how proverbs compress entire disciplines into snackable truths. The Japanese saying, "When the cicadas sing loudly, tomorrow will be hot," captures entomology, thermodynamics, and acoustics in 9 words. Cicadas' membranes vibrate faster in rising heat, amplifying their chorus before temperature spikes, a fact modern biologists confirmed with spectrograms. Similarly, the Maasai warning, "Elephants travel to the mountains when the plains dry," isn't just animal lore, it's a hydrological map. Their massive feet detect subterranean water vibrations, making them living seismographs for distant aquifers. Agricultural proverbs reveal even deeper layers. The Cherokee maxim, "Plant corn when oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear," syncs cultivation with phenology, the study of cyclic biological events. This specific leaf stage coincides with soil temperatures reaching 55 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for germination. Meanwhile, the German Bauernregel farmer's rule, "March dust brings April flowers," encapsulates soil science, noting how early wind erosion distributes mineral-rich particulates that boost spring blooms. Maritime cultures developed especially potent meteorological proverbs. Polynesian navigators recited, "Long waves, short storm, short waves, long storm," to predict squall duration based on ocean swell patterns, a principal fluid dynamicists now call wave periodicity. Norse sailors swore by, "When seaweed clings tight, batten down right," recognizing how kelp's hygroscopic fronds contract before humidity surges, heralding storms. Modern meteorologists found these seaweed observations predict pressure drops with 80% accuracy. The true brilliance of these sayings lies in their error correction. Unlike static texts, proverbs evolved through collective vetting, generations discarding unreliable ones like bad data points. The survival of "clear moon, frost soon" across Arctic to Alpine cultures proves its predictive power, as clear nights allow terrestrial radiation escape, cooling ground moisture into ice. Contrast this with abandoned proverbs like "Bees won't swarm before a storm," which fell from use as beekeepers noticed inconsistent correlations. Today, scientists are rediscovering these oral algorithms. NASA botanists study Vietnamese rice-growing proverbs to track climate shifts, while Swiss glaciologists use alpine sayings about glaciers breathing to reconstruct Little Ice Age weather patterns. Perhaps most remarkably, the Zulu warning, "Lightning prefers the tall tree," was recently validated by lightning mapping arrays showing 70% of strikes hit the highest conductivity object knowledge encoded in 5 words centuries before electromagnetism theory. These proverbs remind us that scientific truth doesn't require jargon or equations to be profound. When a Welsh shepherd mutters, "Sheep flock tight before snow," they're channeling millennia of behavioral ecology observation. That ovine huddling increases before temperature drops due to falling atmospheric pressure affecting their inner ears. The next time you hear an old saying about the weather or crops, pause and listen closely. That simple phrase might just be holding centuries of peer-reviewed wisdom in the palm of its hand. The Icelandic sagas didn't just trace bloodlines, they etched volcanic fury into the very bones of family trees. When the Landnámabók chronicles that Thorstein the Red perished when the mountains spat fire, it wasn't merely dramatic flair. That single genealogical entry pinpoints the catastrophic eruption of Eldgjá in the year 939, an event so violent it stained European skies red for years. By tying ancestral deaths to geological upheavals, these oral genealogies became living stratigraphies, layers of human memory, preserving environmental data as precisely as ash deposits in ice cores. Modern volcanologists cross-referencing saga accounts with tephra layers found the descriptions so accurate they could track magma compositions across generations, proving that a well-rehearsed family history might just be the most durable scientific instrument of all. Half a world away, the Maori Whakapapa genealogies performed similar feats with celestial precision. A chant listing 30 generations might suddenly pivot to note how Tain's descendants sailed when Matariki hung low, embedding the heliacal rising of the Pleiades, a key navigational and agricultural marker within intimate family narratives. These weren't arbitrary insertions. The star's position every 70 years dictated when to burn forests for new fernroot grounds, making its cyclical return as vital to record as births and deaths. Researchers comparing carbon-dated charcoal layers with oral genealogies found less than 5 years deviation between the chant's timeline and physical evidence, a margin tighter than many medieval written chronicles. The brilliance of these systems lay in their dual coding. The Yupik people of Alaska wove climate data into kinship terms. An ancestor called a Great Frost might signify a generation surviving a volcanic winter, while ptarmigan feet could denote a period when snow patterns changed bird migration. Similarly, the Bambara griots of Mali still recite family histories where droughts are measured not in years but in marriages. When the daughter of the iron smith wed the salt trader, marks the decade when desertification forced craft specialization. These narratives transformed abstract environmental shifts into relatable human dramas, ensuring survival lessons stuck like burrs to wool. Perhaps most remarkably, some genealogies functioned as early epidemiological records. The Cherokee Atawehi healers' lineage chants include cryptic verses like, "The grandchildren of falling star coughed blood when the willow buds were late," correlating generations with tuberculosis outbreaks tied to disrupted salicylate cycles in medicinal plants. Modern analysis of burial sites near old Cherokee settlements revealed tuberculosis spikes precisely matching these oral timelines. Likewise, Icelandic bones from saga-mentioned families show higher fluoride levels during recorded volcanic episodes, proof that these weren't just stories but biocultural archives. Today, geneticists are collaborating with tradition bearers to unlock these living databases. In Newfoundland, mitochondrial DNA studies confirmed Inuit genealogies preserving 600-year-old whale hunting territories altered by medieval sea ice shifts. Samoan oral histories about the time of few women after a typhoon now align with genetic bottlenecks in population studies. As climate researchers scramble for pre-industrial baselines, they're finding that the most reliable benchmarks might not be in ice or sediment, but in the rhythmic recitation of a grandmother's lineage, where every name holds a weather event, every generation a geological chapter, and every family story an epic written in the language of the earth itself. The sacred groves of India's Khasi tribes weren't just spiritual sanctuaries, they were biodiversity fortresses wrapped in divine prohibition. When elders warned that the gods will blind those who break a single twig, they weren't merely spinning superstition, they were enforcing an ancient conservation covenant. These taboos functioned with surgical precision. Specific trees like the Ficus religiosa became untouchable not randomly, but because their year-round fruiting sustained entire ecosystems. The punishment narratives: leprosy for hunters who killed pregnant deer, crop failure for those burning sacred groves, encoded cause and effect relationships modern ecologists now confirm, disrupt keystone species or soil microbiomes and systems collapse. Polynesian tapu systems reveal even more sophisticated ecological engineering. The temporary Rahui taboo placed on overfished reefs wasn't just a spiritual pause, it aligned perfectly with lunar spawning cycles and coral regeneration rates. Chiefs declaring certain bays forbidden until the terns nest again had observed that seabird return rates predicted fish stock recovery. These weren't arbitrary deadlines, they were oral sustainability models, where the consequences of violating taboos, like the story of the fisherman whose family starved after he ignored a rahui, taught population dynamics more effectively than any textbook graph. African traditions took this further by embedding entire food web protections in taboo narratives. The Zulu prohibition against killing pythons wasn't about snake worship. It recognized these constrictors as natural rodent control, preventing grain loss. Their creation myth about the python Unwabu, who swallowed the plagues when respected but vomited them when harmed, translated to measurable agricultural outcomes. Villages maintaining python taboos had 30% higher crop yields than those disregarding them. Similarly, the Maasai's sacred relationship with lions ensured apex predators kept herbivore populations in check, preventing overgrazing long before the term trophic cascade existed. What made these systems so effective was their built-in adaptability. When climate shifts altered migration patterns, Inuit elders updated hunting taboos through new stories, like the tale of Sedna's hair tangling when caribou thinned, warning against overharvest. The Cherokee Little Deer myth, where the spirit curses hunters taking more than needed, evolved to include new species as settlements expanded. Unlike rigid laws, these narrative-based taboos could pivot with ecological changes while maintaining cultural authority. Modern conservationists are now recognizing this ancient wisdom. Marine biologists working in Fiji found that locally managed taboo areas, where fishing bans were enforced through ancestor stories, had 200% greater fish biomass than nationally protected zones. In Madagascar, lemur protection programs have revived the Fadi taboo against hunting in dry, using ancestral tales about human lemur kinship to reduce poaching more effectively than fines. These aren't quaint traditions, they're time-tested behavioral nudges, where the fear of spiritual consequences outperforms modern enforcement in creating lasting stewardship. The genius lies in how taboos bypassed rationalization. Where environmental pamphlets might list reasons to protect wetlands, the Maori simply said, "The taniwa will drag you under if you drain the swamp," knowing visceral fear preserves ecosystems better than abstract ethics. When the Amazonian Yanomami claim the forest spirits sicken those who cut kapok trees, they're protecting a keystone species that supports epiphytes, bats, and orchids, all without a single ecology lecture. These narrative-based systems hold urgent lessons today. As we struggle with climate agreements and plastic bans, perhaps we need new taboo stories for the Anthropocene tales of vengeful microplastics choking ocean spirits, or methane ghosts rising from melting permafrost. Not because we believe in literal specters, but because our brains, like our ancestors, still respond more powerfully to stories than statistics. The next time you hear an old prohibition about harming nature, listen closely. That superstition might just contain millennia of observational science, wrapped in the most persuasive package humanity ever devised. A story where breaking the rules doesn't just risk a fine, but unravels the very fabric of the world. The ancient Greeks didn't just dream, they held full-blown medical consultations in their sleep. At the Asclepian temples, patients seeking cures would undergo incubation, lying in sacred chambers where dreams weren't considered random fantasies, but diagnostic tools sharper than any physician's scalpel. When a dreamer reported visions of the god Asclepius tapping their abdomen with his staff, priests interpreted it as a sign of intestinal inflammation, a diagnosis modern gastroenterologists find startlingly accurate given the era's limited anatomy knowledge. These weren't wild guesses, they were the culmination of generations observing how certain illnesses produced recurring dream motifs. A burning sensation in dreams often signaled fever, while visions of crushing weights correlated with respiratory distress. The temple slabs at Epidaurus, inscribed with cure records, read like ancient case studies. Ambrosia of Athens, blind in one eye, dreamed the god opened her eyelids and poured in ointment, awoke healed. Skeptics might dismiss this as placebo, But recent neuroimaging shows specific dream imagery activates the same brain regions as corresponding physical symptoms, suggesting the Greeks were mapping what we now call somatic awareness. Egyptian dream manuals reveal an even more systematic approach. The Chester Beatty Papyrus from 1200 BC doesn't just list symbols, it cross-references them with environmental cues. A dream of murky Nile waters might predict illness if paired with the scent of rotting papyrus that season, linking subconscious impressions with olfactory warnings of bacterial blooms. Their dream interpreters were essentially early neuroscientists, recognizing that the sleeping brain processes subtle bodily signals the waking mind overlooks. When a vizier's dream of teeth falling out preceded a plague outbreak, it wasn't seen as coincidence. Egyptian physicians had noted how systemic infections often manifest first in oral health, making the jaw a literal canary in the coal mine for public health crises. Indigenous cultures took this further by weaving dreams into ecological forecasting. The Aboriginal Nganjukurunga people still practice dream spying, where certain individuals' dreams about fish behavior guide fishing schedules. What sounds like mysticism holds hydrobiological validity. Spawning cycles affect fish metabolism in ways detectable through subtle visual cues only a trained subconscious might recognize during sleep. Similarly, the Cree legend of the dreamcatcher isn't just about filtering nightmares. The web's design mirrors neural networks, and elders traditionally interpreted specific web vibrations in morning light as signals about upcoming weather shifts based on dream content. Modern meteorologists have found these interpretations often align with incoming pressure systems, suggesting generations of dream observation had fine-tuned their ability to detect barometric changes through somatic feedback. The Islamic Golden Age refined dream analysis into a rigorous cognitive science. Physician Al-Kindi's 9th-century treatise on sleep and dreams classified dreams by sensory input: auditory dreams indicating blood imbalance, tactile dreams revealing nerve disorders centuries before Freud's free associations. His contemporary Hunayn ibn Ishaq discovered that patients with liver conditions frequently dreamed of yellow objects, anticipating today's research on how bilirubin levels affect visual processing. These scholars treated dreams as the body's encrypted status reports, where emotional narratives served as wrappers for physiological data. Perhaps most remarkably, the Chinese Taoist dream yoga traditions anticipated modern trauma therapy. Their Meng Shu dream book taught practitioners to re-enter nightmares and reshape outcomes, a precursor to contemporary imagery rehearsal therapy used for PTSD. The Taoist emphasis on dream tears cleansing the liver's anger finds eerie validation in recent studies showing emotional dreams reduce next-day amygdala reactivity. When Tibetan monks speak of lucid dreaming as medicine, they're preserving what neuroscientists now confirm: conscious dreaming increases prefrontal cortex activity, literally helping rewrite maladaptive neural pathways. Today's sleep labs are rediscovering these ancient wisdoms with EEG proof. The Seneca tribe's belief that dreams of falling teeth warn of grinding stress aligns perfectly with bruxism research linking such dreams to masseter muscle tension. Amazonian shamans diagnosing parasite infections through clients' serpent dreams mirror findings that certain gut microbes produce neuropeptides influencing visual cortex imagery. These traditions remind us that before sleep studies and brain scans, humanity had already been mapping the intricate dialogue between body and dream, not through superstition, but through millennia of careful narrative pattern recognition, where every symbol was a symptom, every nightmare a neural alert, and every healing vision a testament to the brain's uncanny ability to diagnose itself. The language of stories. The Hopi language doesn't just describe time. It sculpts it with verbs that change shape like flowing water. Unlike English's rigid past-present-future structure, Hopi speakers use forms indicating whether an event is manifest observable, becoming manifest emerging, or purely conceptual. This wasn't just linguistic flair, it encoded a sophisticated understanding of quantum-like states long before Western science grappled with superposition. When a Hopi elder says Weri rain is occurring versus Werikni rain is imminent based on environmental cues, they're not conjugating, they're forecasting through grammar, blending meteorology with morphology. This precision extends to spatial relationships in other indigenous languages. The Gugu Yimith people of Australia lack words like left or right. Instead, they use cardinal directions baked into every sentence. A simple "the cup is north of the plate" requires constant mental mapping, training speakers from childhood to perceive Earth's magnetic field as naturally as breathing. Neuroscientists studying Gugu Yimithirr speakers found their hippocampi, the brain's navigation center, were significantly larger than average, proving language doesn't just reflect perception, it rewires it. Tlingit, an Alaskan native language, takes this further with verb forms that specify tidal conditions during an action. The suffix kwat means to do at high tide, while sha marks low tide activities, a linguistic tide table preserving generations of coastal subsistence patterns. Modern oceanographers comparing these grammatical markers with historical tide charts found them accurate to within 30 minutes across centuries, turning everyday speech into a chronometer for the moon's pull. Perhaps most astonishing is how Aymara, spoken in the Andes, flips temporal perception. While most cultures metaphorically place the future ahead and past behind, Aymara grammar literally does the opposite. Their word for past is Neira I/front, while future is Kuhipa back, because what's behind us is unseen, just like tomorrow. Cognitive tests reveal Aymara speakers physically gesture backward when discussing future events, embodying a world view where the known past is visible and the unknown future lies in darkness, a linguistic insight that's reshaping how anthropologists study concepts of time. These languages didn't stop at physics and astronomy, they encoded biology too. The Yupik language of Siberia has 19 distinct terms for ice phases, each marking specific salinity levels critical for seal hunting. Pukak describes the brittle, honeycombed ice forming under snow, while Kinu is the slushy layer atop waves, knowledge that meant survival in the Bering Strait. When climate scientists needed baseline Arctic ice data, they turned to Yupik elders whose language preserved thickness measurements in suffixes like fagler, ice thick enough to walk on but not bear a sled. Even grammatical gender served scientific purposes. Many Bantu languages classify nouns by environmental categories, not just masculine/feminine, but trees/plants, shapes/patterns, or natural phenomena. The Swahili word makanga, sand, is in the natural substances class, triggering verb agreements that subtly teach granular physics. This system created mental frameworks where speakers intuitively grouped ecological relationships, making sustainable harvesting practices self-evident through syntax alone. Today, linguists are racing to document these knowledge systems before they vanish. The Brazilian Peraha language's lack of numbers beyond few and many once seemed primitive, until researchers realized it reflected a probabilistic world, matching quantum indeterminacy. Their verbs change based on whether the speaker witnessed an event firsthand or heard it secondhand, a built-in credibility filter that could revolutionize data science. As we decode these ancient linguistic technologies, we're discovering that every grammatical quirk, every odd suffix, might just be another piece of our ancestors' survival manual, written not on parchment, but in the very structure of thought itself. The written word was supposed to be civilization's great leap forward, yet in our rush to record knowledge on parchment and stone, we unwittingly erased entire libraries of wisdom stored in the human voice. When Plato dismissed oral traditions as mere mythos inferior to logos, he set in motion a cultural shift that would see generations of scholars overlook the sophisticated science embedded in stories. Indigenous elders who could recite star paths spanning generations found their knowledge relegated to folklore archives, while Polynesian navigational chants that guided voyages across thousands of ocean miles were dismissed as primitive poetry. The tragedy wasn't just the loss of information, it was the arrogance that assumed ink made truth more permanent than memory. But the tide is turning. Modern researchers armed with satellite imaging and spectral analysis are making a startling discovery. Those old stories they shelved as fantasy, they're proving to be remarkably precise scientific records. Take the Aboriginal songlines of Australia's Western Desert, long considered mere cultural artifacts. When drought struck the region in the 1990s, elders revived ancient water-finding songs describing rock formations and tree roots. Hydrologists following these lyrical maps uncovered hidden aquifers with 93% accuracy, their locations preserved in melodies for 12,000 years. Similarly, Norse solstinan or sunstone navigation tales once thought fanciful were validated when archaeologists found calcite crystals in Viking shipwrecks that polarize light exactly as the sagas described, allowing sailors to locate the sun through dense fog. This revival isn't just about rediscovery, it's a reconciliation of methodologies. Western science's strength lies in its precision instruments and controlled experiments, but oral science offers something equally vital: longitudinal data no sensor could capture. The Maori lunar calendar, Maramatoka, passed down through chants, doesn't just track moon phases, it correlates them with specific fish spawning cycles and plant growth patterns over 800 years of observation. Modern ecologists comparing these oral records with fisheries data found the Maori system predicted snapper spawning seasons more accurately than contemporary models based on mere decades of study. Perhaps most exciting are the collaborations reshaping entire fields. In the Amazon, botanists work with Shipibo healers whose Ikaro's spirit songs encode the medicinal properties of over 3,000 plants. When researchers analyzed these melodies, they discovered the song's rhythmic structures mirror the chemical kinetics of plant compounds: fast tempos for stimulants, slow drones for sedatives. Meanwhile, geologists studying Icelandic eruption sagas have identified 17 previously unknown volcanic events by cross-referencing vivid descriptions of the sky vomiting fire with tephra layers in ice cores. The implications go beyond academic curiosity. As climate change accelerates, scientists are turning to oral archives as baseline records. Inuit, Sela stories about thinning ice and shifting animal migrations now inform Arctic climate models, while Cherokee, Little Deer prophecies about ecological imbalance guide forest management in the Smoky Mountains. Even NASA has taken note. Their Indigenous Peoples Initiative consults with native star knowledge holders to interpret celestial phenomena that telescopes alone can't explain. What emerges is a profound lesson in epistemic humility. The Dogon tribe's oral astronomy describing Sirius's invisible companion star wasn't primitive guesswork. It was refined observation preserved through disciplined storytelling. The Navajo sand paintings dismissed as folk art turn out to be fractal equations visualizing cosmic patterns. These traditions remind us that science isn't defined by its medium, whether carved in cuneiform or sung around a fire, but by its commitment to observation, verification, and the relentless pursuit of truth. As we stand at this crossroads between ancient and modern, perhaps the real discovery isn't just the wisdom in these stories, but how much we still have to learn from the way they've been told. The stories of our ancestors were far more than entertainment. They were the original databases of human knowledge, meticulously designed to withstand the erosion of time. Imagine a world where every myth, every folktale, and every chant was a carefully crafted vessel, carrying not just cultural identity but survival itself. The Aboriginal songlines that mapped deserts, the Polynesian chants that navigated oceans, the Norse sagas that predicted volcanic winters, these weren't just stories. They were living, breathing hard drives where the rhythm of a drumbeat could store tidal patterns and the arc of a hero's journey might encode the phases of the moon. What's truly remarkable is how these narratives bypassed the limitations of written language. While clay tablets crumbled and parchment faded, oral traditions adapted. A single Inuit throat song about sea ice could update itself across generations, tweaking melodies to reflect shifting migration routes. The Cherokee legend of the little deer evolved to include new animals as tribes expanded their territories, ensuring ecological lessons stayed relevant. Unlike static texts, these stories were peer-reviewed by the harshest critic of all survival. If a tale's advice led to poisoned plants or failed crops, it vanished. The ones that endured did so because they worked, refining humanity's collective wisdom into something as durable as stone and as flexible as a river. This ancient fusion of art and science holds urgent lessons for our digital age. In an era drowning in data but starving for wisdom, we're rediscovering the power of narrative to make knowledge stick. Medical schools now teach anatomy through storytelling, mimicking the Maori practice of embedding bone names in genealogical chants. Environmental scientists collaborate with indigenous elders, using flood myths to model climate resilience. Even NASA studies Navajo constellations to understand celestial navigation without GPS. The irony is profound. The very storytelling traditions once dismissed as primitive are now guiding cutting-edge research. So the next time you hear an old myth about the trickster coyote or the wise old turtle, resist the urge to dismiss it as mere folklore. Pull at its threads, and you might unravel a quantum physics metaphor hiding in a spider's web or a behavioral ecology lesson woven into a rabbit's clever escape. These stories were never just fiction, they were humanity's first interdisciplinary textbooks, written in the universal language of wonder. If this journey through the hidden science of storytelling resonated with you, let's keep the conversation alive. Hit like, subscribe, and share your favorite ancestral tale in the comments. Who knows, the next great scientific breakthrough might be lurking in your grandmother's bedtime story, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear it.